Perek Aleph and Perek Beis of Shmona Prakim. They're both very short and they both deal with the same issue. And that is the division of the soul into different components. And the Rambam does make 2 points, which may be semantic, but they are important in terms of classification. Number one, the soul is unitary. The Rambam rejects the idea that there are multiple levels of soul. There is only one soul, which is the life force within you. That is point number one. And point number two is that the soul of every type of life is qualitatively different, meaning the soul of a human is not the same as the soul of an animal, even with respect to functions in which they share in common. Now you understand that these two propositions are ha'bahatalia, because if you would posit a multiplicity of soul, then theoretically it would be possible to say that a human being has a biological soul and an animal has a biological soul, and it's the same soul, but human beings have extra layers. But once the Rambam says that there are not multiple souls, there is only one soul, then it's going to stand to reason that even the nutritional function or the biological function of the human soul is coming from a different place than the biological function of the animal soul, because a human soul and an animal soul are different. So again, so the two ideas are, number one, the unitary definition of soul rather than multiple souls, but number two, human, animal, plant, rock, all of them have some life force. Even inanimate objects have a life force from God. That's what keeps them into existence. But they are qualitatively different entities, even to the extent of an overlap of function. So point one, unitary nature of soul. Point two, animal and human soul are different entities. They are not the same entities. Point three is the actual division of what are called the Kochos HaNefesh, the powers, the potentialities of the soul. And again, you'll remember the list. The Rambam divides it up into 5 functions. Zan literally means the nutritive soul, but that refers to the biological processes within my body: heartbeat, circulation, digestion, respiration. These are the systems that I could be makalkel or not makalkel. The Rambam says the maintenance of those systems is not musar, it is a medicine, meaning if you want to study how to maintain the systems of the body, that is called chokhmas harafua, and that is not the subject of Pirkei Avos. Now the truth of the matter is, there are different Mamori Chazal and even Psukim in the Torah that say if you keep the Torah you'll also have health, and yet we also know that that requires hishtadlus in health and exercise and refuah and diet. And the Rambam himself in Hilchos Teos goes through dietary recommendations. It's very, very interesting. In fact, there's even a diet book out. You may have seen it. I think it's called the Rambam's Diet or something. It kind of updates the Rambam's recommendations for dieting. Okay, so that's the nutritive soul. The second is the margish, that is sensory inputs, which include, that's, you're taking things in. The third is midameh, which is a combination of imagination, or memory and imagination, right? Memory is simply remembering the inputs that came in from level 2, and imagination is combining those inputs to create pictures and images which you never experienced firsthand, but they are combinations of memory. So it's an interesting point that the Rambam is telling us imagination and memory are linked, because imagination is the combination of memories to create combinations that you in fact never directly experienced. Right, so that's 1, 2, 3. The Zan, the Margish, the Midameh. Number 4 is called Misorer. Again, I'm reviewing it quickly. Misorer is essentially the emotional soul, my actions or reactions stemming from feelings of either desire or repulsion. The Rambam actually seems to say our 2 primal emotions are desire for something or a disgust from something. And that triggers anger and desire and yearning and avoidance. All of those things come from the emotions of a human being. And the source of those emotions is really quite elusive. I mean, if you simply ask, what is the source of my emotional reaction to many different things? Part of it is biology, right? People are born a certain way. Part of it is the way we were raised. Obviously, our relationship with our parents has an enormous impact. Our environment, the experiences that we have, be it as it may, they form within our psyches certain ways that we react in either in a positive way or a negative way. And initially, the misorer is in the realm of feeling, but the feelings then get translated into physical actions. Meaning you have this feeling, and then you either act upon it or don't act upon it. And then the fifth level, which the Rambam obviously considers to be the highest and most noble, is called the seichel. The seichel is the intellect, and the intellect is able to make judgments, what is good, what is not good, what is proper, what is not proper, and it is the intellect that optimally can exercise a certain control over the emotions. Now it's interesting, the Baal HaTanya has an expression which are not the exact words that the Rambam uses, but it seems to be very much the Rambam's concept. Hamoach sholet al halev. It is necessary for the brain, we'll call that the intellect, to rule over the heart. We will call that emotions. The brain, the mind, the seichel, must be sholet over the lev. In fact, that is why Lubavitch Hasidus was called, by the Alter Rebbe himself, it was called Chabad. Right? Chabad, it's still called Chabad. Why is it called Chabad? So Chabad is an abbreviation, Chachma, Bina, Das, right? Wisdom, understanding, knowledge. And in the Kabbalistic classification of Sfiros, the three highest Sfiros are Chachma, Bina, Das. Some say Kesser, Chachma, Bina, but Bina Zabeh, let's go with Chachma, Bina, Das. And they are called Hashem's brains. They are called Mochen. They are the Kaviyachol, the intellectual processes that God goes through. And the lower seven, Chesed, Gevura, are the emotional responses, kindness, strength, that emerge from the cogitation of the mental states. So the first three, called Gimel Rishonos, that's actually the Kabbalistic term, Gimel Rishonos, are called Mochen. Mochen means brains. And the Sheva Tachtonos, the lower seven, are called Midos, expressions of character. And in God's perspective, from the Moach comes the Midos. So too, we have to be the Moach Sholet al Alev. So the Alter Rebbe's point was this, and people don't realize this. I'm not going to give you a whole Lubavitch history, although it's a very, very interesting discussion, that the Alter Rebbe was very, very controversial, not only among the Misnagdim. The Alter Rebbe was extremely controversial among Hasidim, among other Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid. Although they all admired him, they disagreed with his Shita and Hasidus, because I'm going to overgeneralize, and this is not going to be totally accurate, but early Hasidus placed such an emphasis on the emotions, on the feelings that you have. Right? Hasidus was a way to make every Jew, even a simple Jew, feel close to God by emphasizing your heart, your feeling, your sincerity. The Alter Rebbe, who after all was a Litvak, he was born in Lithuania, so in a sense even the Alter Rebbe couldn't escape the Litvische intellectualism, which was characteristic of Misnagdim, but it was characteristic of the Alter Rebbe himself. He had great suspicion of emotion. He was suspicious of closeness to God that's based on emotion. Because emotion comes and goes. One moment you're excited, the other moment you're depressed. One day you get up with, I'm going to serve Hashem, I'm going to learn, so great. And the next day you're kind of, tired, you don't have the enthusiasm. Emotions do not have staying power. Emotions don't really last. They go from 1 minute to another minute. Right? You go to a Carlebach minyan, I love God, I love Jews, I love everybody. Okay, but the next day, you'll bump into somebody and say, get out of my way. So the Alter Rebbe and I'll say this, maybe this is not the way a Chabad person would describe it, but I think it actually is accurate. He had a deep mistrust of emotional arousals. He treated them as superficial. He said, emotions have to emanate from deep contemplation, deep thought, an attempt to understand. And that's why he wanted to create a Chasidus that was actually revolutionary at the time. A Chasidus based on Chabad, Chochma, Bina, Das, rather than Chagat, which is Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes, the beginning of the lower seven. And that was a great dichotomy. Other Chasidus was called Chagat, and his Chasidus was called Chabad. Now, whether that's still true, whether things change, I don't want to get it. This is not a current events class. I'm not going to get into what Chabad became and whether it's following that sheet or not following that sheet. Those are separate issues. But I just want you to understand that the Alter Rebbe wanted a Chasidus which was rooted in the Moach, in the Seichel, which I think is very much what the Rambam is saying as well. The Rambam is not talking about Chasidus, but the Rambam is saying life should be Seichel-based. Now, Moach Sholed al Halev can actually have two different meanings, though. The mind should rule over the heart. There are two meanings. There is what you might call a minimalist meaning, and there is what you might call a maximalist meaning. One meaning, which I call the minimalist meaning, is your seichel can control your emotions from getting out of hand. So let's take a very simple example. Let's assume, God forbid, that you're so angry at somebody that you really want to strangle them. I want to kill them. But if you're a normal person, even if you have those feelings, and again, a normal person can have those feelings, although it doesn't sound that normal, as long as they know not to act upon it. So what is that an example of? The seichel is controlling a negative runaway emotion. Meaning it's like imprisoning it. It's like chaining it up. I got this demon inside of me. I'm going to control it. The intellect is an override that prevents your emotions from going out of control. And this is numerous examples, much less dramatic than maybe the rare case that you want to kill somebody. Hopefully that doesn't come up that much. But whatever you want to say, and any exercise in conquering your Yetzer Hara. I'm not going to speak Lashon Hara. I'm not going to eat treif. I'm not going to desecrate Shabbos. I'm not going to be mevatel my learning, even though my feelings are I really want to do something else. So what are you doing in such a case? You're controlling yourself. So in that sense, your mind, your intellect, your values, that which you know is right, assuming you have those values, you know that they're right, tell you I'm not going to do things that I otherwise would want to do. In other words, the seichel, right? So the Alter Rebbe's language was the moach is sholet al olev. If we use the Rambam's language, we'll say haseichel sholet al hamisorer. It's the same thing. It's just different vocabulary. Now that is wonderful. That is how you become a tzaddik. You're kovesh, you're Yetzer Hara. But that is still somewhat of a lower level, even though it's a very high level, but it's a lower level, because you still have those feelings, you still have those desires, you still have those negative emotions, but Baruch Hashem, you're strong enough to have the seichel be miskaber over the negative emotions. That is meaning number one of hamoach sholet al alev, or haseichel sholet al hamisorer. But the Alter Rebbe then goes on and says, there is a deeper level, and the Rambam too. In fact, they're walking in tandem here. The Rambam was much earlier. And that is, the moach, the mind, or the seichel, does not only control the emotions, but the seichel reformulates and reprograms the emotions themselves. So ultimately, your emotions themselves will take on a different configuration in a positive way. The Sefer HaChinuch says, Adam nifal kefi pu'ulosav. a person is transformed based on their virtuous actions. So in other words, instead of saying, I want to kill you, but I will control myself, what happens over time is you no longer want to kill the person. Okay, that's one madrega. And then maybe you'll come to care about the person, to love the person, to look at them in a different way. So hamoach sholet al halev can have a second meaning, that the mind not only holds back or controls the emotion, but the mind can redefine what your emotions are. And the Rambam says, again, the Alter Rebbe, I know I'm mixing in people who were separated by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, but they're mamish going in the same direction. The Alter Rebbe uses the vocabulary of Kabbalah, the Rambam uses the vocabulary of philosophy. They're both moving in the same direction, that controlling emotions is not simply a matter of having negative feelings, but controlling yourself by not acting upon them. That is a madrega, and I don't want to diminish that madrega. If you can live that way, you are a tzaddik, actually. But the higher level and the ultimate goal is you re-educate your emotions so that they no longer have these negative strivings and they're directed towards positive strivings. That's why, in truth, if you want to know the real antidote to Lashon Hara, right? Lashon Hara is such an aveira. We gossip. We want to say bad things about people. So people think, oh, well, I got to control my mouth. I got to bite down on my lip. I got to bite my tongue. Well, that's true. You may have to do that. But if your whole life you're going to be biting on your lip, you're going to have a very bloody lip. The real long-term antidote towards Lashon Hara is not controlling your speech, but it's changing your perception of the reality, so you no longer have a desire to say bad things about people because you see them in a good light. So at that point, I'm not struggling, gee, I have this thing I want to say about this guy, but I can't do it because it's Lashon Hara. I always love that, by the way, when people go over to you and say, I know something about this guy I really want to tell you. And you might say, well, what is it? Lashon Hara. I'm not allowed. Yeah, I mean, I love that kind of hints to Lashon Hara, right? But even if you're righteous enough that you're not going to give away a hint, but as long as inside I really have this desire to put people down, that's not a sustainable point. At some point you're going to break. At some point it's going to be like a pressure cooker that just explodes. So really, the key is changing your emotions. So the point I'm making is, Haseichel, hamoach sholeit al halev, haseichel sholeit al hamisorer, which is the Rambam's terminology, has two meanings. At its lower level, it means the seichel controls emotions. At its higher level, the seichel redefines and redirects emotions so that your emotional responses are going to be channeled in a positive direction. And the Rambam says, Pirkei Avos is all about re-educating the emotions. In other words, Pirkei Avos is not so much about controlling your negative emotions. That's like basic Yetzer Hara work. But it's about re-educating yourself to be a different type of person inside. And that's the secondary meaning. That's the higher meaning of Hamoach Sholeit al Halev. Did you want to say something?
Yeah. So to what extent is controlling emotions healthy at a given point in time of someone's journey? And then also to what extent can emotions be shifted and controlled through the mind?
Yeah, so controlling emotions is, of course, absolutely necessary on one level. I think everybody would agree with this. If I have, a desire to hurt somebody, if I have a desire, pedophilia, a desire to have sex with a kid, right? So these are desires, and maybe right now I'm in the throes of those desires. I got to learn to control myself. But you are correct, as a long-term strategy, it is relatively doomed to failure, because at some point you simply crack up, which means there's a short-term necessity and then there's a longer-term plan. In the short term, you got to operate with control. But in the long term, to maximize or optimalize spiritual hatzlacha, there has to kind of be a reformulation. Now, is that possible? Well, the answer is it's very hard, but it certainly is possible. That is what Musar is about. That is what Hasidus is about, albeit in different directions. The whole point is we can change. Now, there are limits. We're not infinitely changeable. That's very, very true. Let me quote to you the Gemara in Masechah Shabbos, a famous Gemara. I'm pretty sure you heard about it. The Gemara Masechah Shabbos is going with the Shita. Against the Rambam actually doesn't hold of that Shita generally, that the mazel, the constellation or the planet that you're born under, determines to some degree your personality. Right? The Rambam says no such thing. Other people say there is such a thing. For our purposes, you'll see this is actually not that important. But let's go with the Gemara that you're born under a certain planet. You're going to be a certain type of person. So the Gemara says a person who is born under mazel ma'adim. Ma'adim is the red planet, Mars, right? You're born under Mars. That's your astrological sign. So Chazal say, bad news. You're born under the planet Mars. You will have a lust for blood. You will love bloodshed. Sounds bad. But you can make a choice. You can be a shochet, so you're slaughtering kosher animals, a mitzvah. You could be a mohel, even better, or you can be a murderer. Now, this Gemara is profoundly important because you could look at the Gemara, and your reaction might be, this thing about mazel turns me off, superstition, I don't believe in this. But there's a much larger point because Chazal are struggling with the idea that on one hand, we believe in free will. On the other hand, we also believe you're born a certain way. Now, Chazal referred to that as your mazel. Okay, let's say you don't want to go with mazel. So we'll call it DNA. In other words, it makes no difference if you call the deterministic part of your life mazel or you call it DNA. The main point is Chazal are addressing a fundamental question. How can there be free will if you're born a certain way? Doesn't that mean you're kind of stuck? So what is Chazal's answer to this? Chazal's answer is that your bechira is not necessarily to change who you are, but it is to direct who you are in positive channels. In other words, Chazal don't say, he who is born under Mars will love blood and your avodah in life is to learn to hate bloodshed. Maybe that's not possible. But your mission in life is to take your nature and direct it and channel it in positive ways. So the insight of this Gemara is actually a very, very profound insight that's very relevant to raising children, teaching Talmidim, and even working on ourselves. And that is, I'm not supposed to necessarily try to change myself, because if anything, that's going to be very self-destructive. But I want to kind of identify who I am and then determine that I can direct these aspects of my personality in positive and good ways. So, as I say, I think a lot of people read this Gemara and they get distracted by the concept of the mazel. And again, I mean, listen, if Chazal say mazel is valid, then it's valid. The Rambam says not. But the point I'm making is that don't get distracted, because the point of the Gemara is not about mazel. The point of the Gemara is to how do you balance what you're born with your free will. Chazal happened to use mazel as the thing you're born with. We could talk about other things that you're born with. We can talk about your DNA. So sometimes we get sidetracked because we're not really paying attention to what the main point of the discussion is, which is a very profound and relevant point. We get a little distracted by really what is a side point that's not of great importance. In other words, if you're asking me, you can do this in the Q&A, does Judaism believe in astrology? All I can tell you is yes and no. Some Shitos say yes, and some Shitos say no. The Ibn Ezra, who by and large was a very rationalist person, had a great deep belief in astrology and wrote many svarim on astrology. The Rambam considered it to be fake and stupid, and only idiots are involved in astrology. So this was a huge, huge machlokas. And either way, though, I want to point out that even the Ibn Ezra, who believed in astrology, we're not talking about Gene Dixon or horoscopes in newspapers. I mean, that is not the chachma that we're talking about. But there was a chachma sakechavim that is known to Kabbalists and the like, and some consider that to be valid. But the point I'm making is that that's not the major point of the Gemara. The Gemara is making a much deeper point. That is the notion of change is not so much about change, it's about redirection within the parameters of your personality. Now, in truth, however, as I read the Rambam, I'm not sure, I'm thinking out loud, that the Rambam would agree with what I just said. I mean, the Rambam seems to contemplate that you can genuinely change even your personality. So the Rambam perhaps is more radical than this Gemara itself says. They do say, the Alter of Kelm, who was the great, great, great Baal Musar, he was the Talmud Mufak of all of Yisrael Salanter's Talmidim, he was the closest to Rav Yisrael Salanter. And the Alter of Kelm was all about changing your midos, changing your character. And the Alter of Kelm himself said, I believe he said this, that he only met one person who totally changed midos and became a different person. That was his daughter, Rebbetzin Nechama Liba. He said, he had said he had never met a person who was able to totally change themselves. So, even for that, in fact, she became. People don't know that this was Rav Dessler's grandmother. Nechama Liba in Kelm became kind of a Baal Musar herself. Bachurim used to go to her, and she would talk to them. She actually became in Kelm. She, after the death of her father, she became almost, I wouldn't say Rosh Hashiva officially, but she became a pretty dominant spiritual force in the lives of the Talmidim. Yeah.
When you were mentioning Chazal, when they say that if someone's born under a certain sign, they have a propensity for something, so therefore they should choose some other outlet or other direction that will fulfill that will be a correct example. And you were saying that would work, maybe today we could say it's like DNA, and you gave the example, say like someone's gay, or you said, Shalom, someone's a pedophile. What would be
right. So the question
what would be
how do you direct it? That's a very good question. Meaning, if the Talmud is suggesting that every type of negative tendency can be directed into positive channels, so you're giving me two concrete, specific examples. A person is inclined to either be gay or pedophilia. Exactly, how do you channel that in a good way? I could say some things, but they would be, I would probably get a lot of hate mail, and I don't know if it's right. It might be. This might be an idiotic suggestion, and I'll admit this idiotic suggestion. But a pedophile. A pedophile can become a nursery school teacher, meaning to say, there might be ways. Again, obviously, this has to be monitored with extreme delicacy, obviously, but there might be ways that a person could indulge their love for children in a non-sexual, non-predatory way. Is it possible? It's something to think about, something to talk about, friendship. Men can have friendships that are very deep and emotional without crossing lines. Now, again, I know I will expect the hate mail coming in. I mean, obviously, Rabbi Breitowitz said, make this pedophile teach in a nursery school. I mean, I understand that as a practical matter, it may be extremely difficult. But I think theoretically, there are possibilities there that on some level might be explored. But again, you need a heavy dose of therapy and mental health work in order to possibly bring a person to that level. But you are correct. It's a little difficult to kind of find a good path for every type of tendency. Yeah.
So I guess something a little less extreme, like more practical, like somebody has an anger issue or strong sexual desires. How could he direct that?
Yes. Well, okay. So here's the thing. So if a person is strong sexual desires, if a person is married, so he can be with his wife, and he can use this for passionate love and connection and the like. But anger is a good example. Now, anger is a bad midah. It's not good to get angry. But anger has a component within anger that you might call righteous indignation. That when I see an injustice, I want to do something about it. I don't just say, that's the way the world is, So in a sense, you could take your anger. Now, you still have to control it. I'm not saying let it be unrestricted, but you can use it like to fight for injustice. If people are being oppressed, you stand up and do something about it. As opposed to in other words, let's say a person has a certain type of temperament that's very gentle, he never gets excited, everything's fine. Now you think that's wonderful, okay? So I see somebody being beaten or somebody being tortured, okay, listen, too bad, etc. So anger can be that component that makes you act. Moshe Rabbeinu sees, sees an Egyptian beating a Jew. Moshe Rabbeinu kills him. Okay, whether it was miraculously or not, but Moshe Rabbeinu could not just let these things happen. Something is unjust. Something is not good. Somebody's being hurt who doesn't deserve to be hurt. Even though Moshe was the most modest of all people, he stepped forward. So anger does have a potential use in the world in the sense of propelling you to fight for causes which involve, justice and fairness and the like. So there are ways of directing. Let's take things like hyperactivity. These are already much easier things. Let's say you have a kid who can't sit still. I got to move around, and maybe it's a medical condition, maybe it's a genetic condition, whatever it is. So sometimes parents say, you're going to sit at this Shabbos table for 6 hours and not move a muscle unless you have to go to the bathroom. And even then. Now, you're going to drive the kid crazy. The kid will be nuts. And, he may grow up, God forbid, to hate Shabbos and hate Judaism and hates all sorts of things. So you have to understand that what you do with a kid that is hyperactive, I don't mean hyperactive in terms of a technical diagnosis, I'm just using it in a general way, is not the same thing as a kid who loves to read and loves to learn. So the hyperactive kid, even in yeshiva, he should be the one who buys the pizza from Lava Malkas and sets up the chairs and makes the phone calls and does the invitations, in which he's involved in a lot of frenetic activity that the Masmid really doesn't want to get bothered with. I don't want to make phone calls. What are you bothering me? But for a certain personality, that's exactly what they want to do. I want to buy the supplies. I'll go to town. I'll get the stuff. So what are you doing? You're recognizing that everybody has different types of talents, different types of personalities, and you're giving outlets for all of those different people. That is really what the Gemara is telling us. You're hyperactive? Okay, go and buy the pizza and bring it, right? The person that's more passive, you sit and learn, right? Whatever it would be. So that is the idea, what Shlomo HaMelech said, Chanoch lenar al pi darko. Classic pasuk. Train a youth according to their way. And the Vilna Gaon explains, every person has the uniqueness of their personality. And the chinuch has to be directing them along the lines of their personality.
On the discussion of anger, what would you say in the context of I assume a lot of people in this room are students you've had in the past who've come from secular families, and there's been, let's say, tension, to put it mildly, between the parents and the child about, having a Jewish life, going to yeshiva, this and that, and maybe there was some anger in the home and all that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an open question, but what would you say in those circumstances about, first of all, maybe not so much as anger justified, but how to direct the anger in the environment that there is?
Yeah. So I would say this, again, you have to be very careful. When we talk about directing it, I don't mean to say you can direct it in every particular context. There may be contexts in which anger is not appropriate and you find other ways to express your enthusiasm back in yeshiva or whatever it would be. In terms of the actual situation you're describing, in which a kid becomes religious in a home that's not religious and the parents feel that they're being taken over, or the kid feels he's not being respected, and the kid feels I can't do what's important to me, and the parents feel, you're our child, this is our home, who do you think you are, right? And both sides have a certain correctness in what they're saying. Again, from the parents' perspective, if they're not religious, their discomfiture is entirely understandable. You can't even say it's irrational in any way. So I think the achrayus is on a ben Torah, a bas Torah, a boy or a girl, to kind of treat everybody with respect, with derech eretz, and to basically tell mom and dad, listen, I know that I've made some changes and I don't want to inconvenience you, and I'm really, really grateful for every accommodation. And you should also have to tell them you still love them, you still respect them, you still look to them for guidance and wisdom, that just because you've taken on additional things does not mean you're negating the relationship. Because I will tell you this, the number one thing that parents are afraid of when their kids become frum is not so much that their kids are frum, but that their kids will no longer care about them, no longer want to talk to them, no longer want to deal with them. That is what gets a parent very, very upset. And if you can communicate that that's not the case, I still love you and I respect you, and you gave me the fundamental values of my life, which is true, then I think they'll let you do anything you want. You could sit on a flagpole for 3 weeks and just eat whatever it is, eat lettuce. As long as they know you're not cutting them off, they will let you do what you want, and they will even support you. They will be proud of you in that way. Because I can tell you this, I know this from long experience, that parents are afraid of being rejected. That is what they are afraid of, and that will get them angry, and that will get them upset. And you have a responsibility to communicate that that's not what's going on here. Sometimes, unfortunately, it is what's going on here, and that's not right, and that needs to be corrected if in fact that is what's going on. You know what Mark Twain said? This was not about religion, obviously, but Mark Twain once said that when he was 17, he thought his parents were so idiotic. When he was 21, he was amazed how much wiser they had gotten in only 4 years. Right? And, I think a lot of us will discover this. I mean, even parents who are not religious can be wise, can have judgment, can have things they could teach you, and you have to be open to that type of input as well. I've told the story many times before, so forgive me, but I'll mention it very, very quickly just at the very end here, that I know a fellow who lives in Meashorim. He grew up in a secular home in Virginia, totally secular, atheist upbringing. He came to Eretz Yisrael after college on a backpack tour of Middle East, and he became not only religious, he became a gerer chassid, which is very rare. A chassid with payas, beard, nisaks, shtreimel, Yiddish speaking. And he found a woman that he married who came from the same background. I mean, those are the only two people in the world who have that background, and they're both gerer chassidim. So I was invited to the chasana in Meashorim, and I was a little uncomfortable. It wasn't my normal environment. I had a black hat, a dark suit, but it wasn't my normal thing. But his parents were there from Northern Virginia, and they looked like they were in the Twilight Zone. I remember the father was absolutely shell-shocked. He was like, his eyes were wide open. He was just like staring. He had no idea what this world was. Unbelievable. So at the end, and by the way, not only was there a mechitza, the women were in another building. I mean, whatever. Anyway, at the end of the Suda, they bring the kala into the room so they could say Sheva brachas together, and the chassan wanted to give a little drasha. So the chassan gets up, he talks in Yiddish for 5 minutes, which is pretty amazing. I mean, a year ago he was not even religious. Now he's giving a drasha in Yiddish. But then at the end, he says to his parents in English, he says, Mom and Dad, he says, I know that the life I chose is not the life you wanted me to choose. But I want you to know that 90% of what I am is from you. And the 10% that's different is because you gave me the courage to seek out what I needed to seek out. So I owe you everything. This was really, to me, this was a profoundly beautiful remark. Now, I was sitting next to a Hasidic guy who seemingly didn't know English, but he was like nodding away, Now, it could be, maybe he was an American who went, maybe he's the third guy that went through this process. I don't know. But I think there was a sense that even among people who didn't know Yiddish, didn't know English, they could tell this was a powerful statement. Chazal say, Devarim hayotzim min halev. When words come out of the heart, they enter the heart. And to me, this is like I say the story a lot. I'm sorry, I apologize if you heard it before, because to me, it's emblematic of what the process of tshuva should be, that it should not be a process that makes barriers between you and your family. It should be a process in which you're still connected, and it even strengthens the connection. And that's how I think you could deal with anger. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't going to be challenges. There will be challenges, but I can tell you that when parents feel that you love them and you want to be connected to them, they will meet you more than halfway to try to accommodate what it is that you need. And you will get what you need by showing them that you still respect and love them. Okay, that's the key to really almost everything. Okay, you'll be well and take care.